History is made today with Indiana beating Oregon 30-20 and earning their first win against an AP top 5 team in school history. They held the Ducks to 20 total points, 13 of which came on offense. If not for that pick six, guys, I don't know if this would have been all that close. This game reminded me in part like the Oregon-Penn State game and like the Texas Tech-Utah game, where early on, Indiana is holding in there. They win the first half, but it is close, and there's a chance for things to change when the second half rolls around. And instead what happens is Indiana takes full control. They hold Oregon to something close to 2 yards per play, 2 or 2.5 yards per play in the second half. Oregon doesn't reach the red zone outside of that pick six by Brandon Finney, who's being targeted and beaten up on all day long. He made a good play there. He's certainly a future star, and I think this game says a whole lot more about Indiana than it does Oregon. Oregon will continue to get better as the year goes on. Oregon is a great team. They are a national title contender. At this point, we also have to admit that Indiana is a national title contender too. They played as if they had the better roster, and after this game, I think that they do. They coached, and they had the confidence of a team that had a stronger identity and had superior on and off-field staff, both scouting the talent coming in to Indiana this year, scouting the talent they retained, scouting the talent they had to develop, and also calling plays and trying to adjust for your opponent's weaknesses, their strengths, tweaking your scheme. Oregon, really, they were in this game because of a few factors. They were at home. They got a big play off of busted coverage in the same way Illinois did earlier in the year, and they had the pick six. In hindsight, the more I look at it, the more I think about it, Indiana was the definitively better team on the field here. Definitely. I don't know how close it was between these two teams. I want to re-watch this game in its entirety. It felt very close early on for much of the first half, for parts of the third quarter, and it was. However, I imagine if I were to re-watch this game through the eyes, through the lens of Indiana winning this big, I think Indiana probably starts to control the game earlier than I expected. What was a signal, perhaps, of things to come was when Oregon missed their field goal, and then Indiana was able to win the middle eight by driving down and kicking a long field goal of their own of 58 yards. Indiana was beating Oregon's defensive backs in man coverage all day. Oregon had probably double the amount of defensive pass interference calls that they were actually called for. Indiana was beating them in man. They were figuring them out in zone. Indiana was more physical, not just in the trenches, but they were physical more on the outside too. They looked like the better team. They were the better team. If you put gray, if you painted these teams' uniforms gray and, blurred out the head coaches and the staff, you would think that Indiana was Oregon and Oregon was Indiana. I know that there is technically a size difference between these teams on the lines of scrimmage. I did not notice it that much, in part because Indiana was just so dominant there. I mean, you look at the team stats to the left-hand side, and as you can probably tell, I'm a little bit sick, I'm plugged up, but this is a huge game. I want to give an instant reaction to this and probably do a deeper dive on this game tomorrow, give some more thoughts on it. Indiana had 326 total yards to Oregon's 267. They outrushed them. They held Oregon to 81 yards. Everyone was talking about that size advantage. Everyone. And Oregon also had it against Penn State, and you saw it there, but as we've seen from Penn State against UCLA and against Northwestern, they're just a broken team. Straight up broken. And in that game, in the fourth quarter, Penn State won in the trenches over Oregon. Here, in almost every drive, almost every facet, Indiana was winning the lines of scrimmage. And from there, Mendoza played as a more mature quarterback. He had the better game than Dante Moore, with, keep in mind, in theory, less talent surrounding him. Indiana's defense completely ate Oregon alive offensively. They had 6 sacks, while only giving up 1. That was something that reminded me of Texas Tech, Utah, Oregon, Penn State. Was the road team in both of those games was getting tons of pressure on the opposing quarterback, and the home team was lucky if they could get to the quarterback. That's what this was right here. That is what this was. A complete dominant effort defensively by Indiana. And it's not like Oregon's defense played poorly. They got the pick 6. They forced some key stops and punts. They came up clutch at times, but ultimately Haynes did a much better job with the talent he had and with the fact of some of Oregon's perceived non-negotiables and dealing with them. Did a much better job than Lupoy did. Lupoy on that third and goal, it's tied up 20-20. You were lucky to have the momentum because of a great defensive play by a true freshman DB. And I think it was Finney again, though I could be wrong. Surratt just bullies him in the end zone. Like, that was the epitome of the entire game. I think same with the final interception on Moore, where one play is just trying to get it out quickly. Oh, it's caught by an Indiana linebacker. I believe it was Isaiah Jones who caught that, who's had quite the fantastic year. Yes, it was Isaiah Jones. Isaiah Jones, Lewis Moore, each at an interception. Indiana was getting push on Oregon's O-line more than the powerful Oregon D-line was on Pat Coogan, Bray Lynch, Drew Evans, Khalil Benson, Carter Smith. I know that the right side of that O-line had some issues in false starts. Really, the entire O-line did, and they had issues with Oregon stemming. Keep in mind, if not for that happening, that's a very fixable issue, the score might have been worse. If not for the pick 6, same thing. There are more plays here that I could change that widen the margin of victory for Indiana than I can change plays that make this game more competitive for the Ducks. That is how dominant this second half was. It was a coaching clinic. I think this game shows that Indiana is a real threat to win the national title. Mendoza, outside of that one bad throw, didn't make many mistakes, didn't put the ball in harm's way, played like a first-rounder. And again, as I mentioned, Oregon is a great team. Oregon will get better. Oregon is a national title contender, and they are certainly more athletic with a higher ceiling than they had last year. Ohio State went to Oregon last year and couldn't beat them, couldn't overcome some things. Indiana goes to Oregon, and they killed them in the second half. They outscored them 17-10, and offensively, it was a 17-3 outscoring. Again, that pick 6 was huge for Oregon. Shame that they couldn't capitalize off of an awesome redeeming type play from Brandon Finney, the young player. I thought that Pat Coogan played his rear off, did an exceptional job. I think he had a better game than Iapani Lololu, who is a star and a future NFL player on the Ducks, their center. What Indiana did too is, again, they played well in man coverage, but what they excel at is zone and keeping everything in front of them and keeping you a little off kilter and making it hard for you to identify whether they're 5, 6, or 7 guys up the line of scrimmage are actually all going to come forward or drop back into coverage. They do a really good job at that. They were confusing Oregon's offensive line. More importantly, they were just overpowering them. There were plenty of holds on Oregon's offensive line, probably some missed holds. They got to Dante Moore 6 times for a sack, at least. They got to him more other times. Again, absolute coaching clinic by Indiana. Huge win. There's a big argument after this game that Indiana's the best team in the country. And in terms of strength of record, look, they killed Illinois in a fashion that I think Ohio State cannot do. Doesn't mean Ohio State's worse than Indiana. Just means because of those two team styles, Ohio State could not beat Illinois in the way Indiana did. They went on the road and beat an Iowa team who probably will beat Wisconsin tonight, though we'll see about that. It's always 3-0 Iowa. I haven't checked the score since then. And they went into Autzen and gave Oregon their first loss in that stadium since 2022, and their first two-score loss in that stadium since I don't know how long. 2018, 2017 was the last time Oregon lost at home by multiple scores. And this might be Dan Lanning's best team, definitely second or third best. We'll see if it's better than the 2024 team. At this point, I cannot say it's better than the 2023 team that finished number one in a variety of advanced analytics. I know the strength of schedule is what it is, but whatever. This Indiana team, some final takeaways before we get out of here. They are so much better than they were last year. So much better. To win in total yards, passing yards, rushing yards, to win the turnover battle, to have 23 first downs to 14, winning the penalty battle, winning the third down battle, forcing Oregon to go for it 4 times on fourth, getting that key stop early was a tone setter. They're the better team, straight up. When you win by 2 scores against a program and a team like Oregon, and you have to travel multiple time zones over, thousands of miles over, you have to deal with their home field advantage and the fact that they have a size edge over you, and in terms of high school recruiting, they are far more talented than you. Far more talented. And they beat that Oregon offensive line and that Oregon offense, all 11 players like a drum. Beat them. Guess who finished first in receiving yards for Oregon? It wasn't Brycen Moore, who averaged less than 10 yards per reception. Kenyon Sadiq only had 2 catches for 21 yards. It was Malik Benson on a busted coverage. A busted coverage that really resembled that Illinois-Indiana game where Indiana ended up winning 63-10. That's what that was. That was more of a fluke play than anything else. Oregon averaged 8.9 yards per reception because Indiana's keeping everything in front of them. They're keeping their eyes on the quarterback. When they are in man coverage, they're executing it very well. They're getting to the quarterback. Dante Moore had his worst game of the season. It's no coincidence that it was against the best defense he's going to play in the regular season and potentially in his entire 2025 season and Oregon's entire 2025 season. It's because Indiana has an elite defense. Something I'm going to tweet out probably after I release this video is that it's Matt Patricia and Bryant Haynes' world, and we're all living in it. Those are the 2 best defensive coordinators right now. In terms of just this year's performance, I think Iowa's Phil Parker's pretty close. The defense lost so much, and they look better than they were last year. Knowles certainly taken a lot of hits. Don't know how much of that is his fault, but Patricia and Haynes have been so obviously above everyone else outside of maybe DJ Durkin. It's crazy. And Dante Moore was getting round 1, pick 1 hype before this game. I'm curious to see if he gets that same attention after it. I still think that he's incredible. I think that Oregon is a great team. After this game, they'll be a top 5 team in my ratings. They will. There's nothing here that says they aren't a top 5 team because all of the analytics, when you factor out priors, say that Indiana is the best team in the country. When you factor out the priors, everything screams that Indiana is the nation's best team, and Texas Tech is trailing close behind them. Now, you shouldn't fully take priors out of the picture. You shouldn't. I'm not saying Indiana here is going to go 16-0 and win it all for sure. There's a possibility of that, I think, but with how chaotic this year's been, you can't pen in anything, let alone pencil in everything. But Indiana's defense is elite. It's a better unit than it was last year. It's the same thing with the offense. Indiana last year couldn't have made a field goal over 45 yards. They drilled one from 58 yards, and because of Lanning doing his best to ice the kicker, they had to do it twice, and Brennan Franke made it. And his kickoffs always landed behind the end zone, so you can't have any returns. Just Signetti is right now, if you're only looking at this year, he's the best coach in America. I think Signetti, along with Kalen DeBoer, are your best game managers in America. Now, neither of those two have exactly the resume of Kirby Smart or Ryan Day. I don't think they, at least in regards to DeBoer, have some of the CEO things knocked down yet that those two do. But Signetti's checking all of the boxes. He's checking all of those boxes, and you can't help but admire that. What a big win. What a massive win program-wise for Indiana. If you're a 4-star or 5-star on defense, why wouldn't you go there? They're doing a better job of developing players than anyone in America. Anyone. And that includes a team such as Alabama offensively, or Ohio State offensively, or Ohio State defensively, or Oregon in the lines of scrimmage. Indiana is out developing everyone right now. And given the fact that they are outside the top 70 in team talent composite, that's not really up for debate. They're out developing everyone. They're out coaching everyone. I said preseason, I think Signetti's a top 5 coach. That opinion's been totally vindicated after today. There's a chance at the end of the year he's like top 2 or number 1 in terms of coaching power ratings, not total resume. If we were measuring that, Dabo Swinney's still a top 5 head coach. Kirby's 1, Day's 2. There's not really a debate. But in terms of the here and now, Signetti could be a top 2 or number 1 head coach after this year if this team keeps winning in the fashion that they are. Size does matter at times, but this was an instance where it doesn't. Indiana didn't just want it more. They played as if they were better conditioned, as if they were more physical, as if they were used to being challenged and Oregon necessarily wasn't. They were able to match Oregon's speed for speed. There were some plays where Dante Moore had an opportunity to scramble and pick up yards, and on those same plays against Penn State, he picked up the yards, and Indiana would tackle him in the backfield or get a sack on him. There were plays at times where it looked as if Oregon could start churning Indiana, where they would get yards after contact with their running backs or pass catchers. But then Indiana would do the same thing to Oregon's defense in response. So I think both of these teams are just physical. They traded blows early on, and Indiana being the better coached team, the more physical team, the better developed team, the older team. That's another thing to keep in mind. They really began to wear on Oregon. Oregon, psychologically, you could tell in the third and fourth quarter, just based on how the crowd was generating noise, that they were scared. You could tell that they were not expecting this. And whenever that happens, it's not the kiss of death, but it's very close. It's what happened with Ohio State over Michigan late in the third quarter in 2022. And by over Michigan, that's incorrect. It happened in that game. Michigan ended up winning. And you could tell late third quarter, early fourth quarter, the crowd knew that if not for a miracle, Michigan was going to really start, running away with it. And that's what happened here with Oregon. You could tell as Indiana kept inching closer and closer to the end zone. It was especially clear on that second Hemby rushing touchdown. And good for him, by the way. He's a future NFL back. You could hear the anxiety. And you could see Lanning, too. Lanning was tense here. He wasn't as confident. He wasn't as boisterous, wasn't as coked out as he was against Penn State. And that was from the get-go, too. I think, in a sense, him and the staff knew this team would be a tougher challenge than Penn State, and they just didn't know that it would be that much tougher, but they knew it would be tougher regardless. Oregon does have issues on the outside, so they averaged negative 0.31 EPA per drop back. Final few stats I'll mention in this game. Indiana averaged negative 0.1 EPA per play, but Oregon just averaged negative 0.22. Really, it was a story of Indiana being slightly better in all aspects of the game, minus the talent. And you saw some of that talent with the big plays, the pick six and the deep shot. Indiana wasn't going to be making those because they don't have some of those tangible athletic abilities with their players that Oregon does. But if you are better athletically in terms of natural gifts, but your opponent has worked harder, so in areas of strength and athleticism that are more controllable, and I find this a lot with line of scrimmage play, you don't need those same 5 stars, those same elite athletes on the lines of scrimmage. That's more of a developmental and chemistry position. And if you just coach and develop better in general, a lot of that stuff won't matter. The fact that you can run maybe a faster 40-yard dash, or you were a 5-star out of high school. Some of that stuff gets minimized pretty quickly when you have a coaching edge, when you have a developmental edge, when you have a trench edge, when you're more physical. And Indiana was all these things. They had a 47% success rate, held Oregon to a 36% success rate. A big part of that is because Oregon just has Brycen Moore and Kenyon Sadiq, and everyone else is not a non-negotiable player. So IU can focus on those two, and at the same time, if you get pressure, even if those two are open, it will be hard to get them the ball because you're constantly under duress. Moore rarely had a clean pocket. Even when they protected him well, it was well in the context of he could get the ball out. He still had to maneuver, he still had to backpedal, and he still had to be hyper aware of the pocket. Because if he held the ball for 1 second longer, he'd be sacked. It was not the same pocket presence he had against Penn State. Again, what a massive win for Indiana and Curt Cignetti. For Oregon, it's a defeat that will leave a bitter taste in your mouth because of your huge roster advantage and size advantage, and it didn't matter. And that's on your coaching staff. You saw one of the rare instances of a team that definitely has superior coaching to you. They walked in, they coached circles around you, they physically beat the living crap out of you. I didn't mention even the context of my pick. I was actually wrong in picking Oregon to win, but I did pick Indiana to cover and felt somewhat strongly about it and felt more strongly about it as I got closer to kickoff. Looking into it, if Oregon wasn't going to be able to roster IU and just beat them strength on strength, Indiana matched up incredibly well with Oregon here, and you saw that play out. The minute Oregon and Indiana both realized the Ducks weren't going to just out-athlete Indiana, Indiana's control and matchup edges really began to settle in. That's both good coaching, but also elite development. The fact that Indiana, with their roster composition, can win this game by double digits is incredible. I think if Signetti, I know, if Signetti wins out here and they win some playoff games, if they just go 12-0, if they win the Big Ten, this will be the best 2-year coaching job in college football history with the way things are operating right now. This is a game that, as I mentioned in a video previewing, just an additional video talking about the importance of this game, this is a historic game. And the most extreme outcome that could impact history the most happened here with Indiana dominating Oregon. Recruits are going to see this. Mark Cuban, who's involved with IU athletics, will see this. Other IU donors will see this. Oregon donors will see this and say, we got to get even better athletes, and we may need to make adjustments coaching-wise, and they're going to start pouring in. Because they still know they're good. They're still confident they're good. This is going to further spike the current arms race in football, especially between the Big Ten teams who can't really be matched by any other conference or any other top teams in any other conferences outside of maybe Miami and Texas in terms of budget and investment. Massive, massive game by Indiana. And that's it here. Go Hoosiers, go Ducks. Your programs and coaches are both fantastic. The better team just won today, and I would not be shocked if these two teams rematch sometime this season.